Ohio, excuse me.
I shall continue then.
The gentleman is recognized.
When you walk into the Bradbury Science Museum at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, you're greeted on your immediate left by replicas of Fat Man and Little Boy, the two bombs that dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The space surrounding them does not include a picture of the leveled Japanese cities, pictures of children with massive birth defects, or stories of families and hundreds of years of history obliterated in the blink of an eye. It does not include a discussion of the health effects of worldwide distribution of radiation from the bombs or from the larger proliferation of nuclear technology that emanated from Los Alamos. Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order. I'm sorry, but I'm making a presentation here and I can't continue if members are talking in the background. And I'm asking members that this is an important debate. Please pay attention, and if you have something else to say, if you participate, that would be great. Now, I'm speaking about this Bradbury Science Museum. The bombs reside in a section of the museum called Defense, which presents information on the nuclear arsenal, the nuclear stockpile, plutonium, and explosives. Other sections discuss how nuclear energy works and how the bomb was triggered. A substantive discussion of the myriad negative impacts of the technology that came out of the Manhattan Project is relegated to obscurity. A public forum tucked away in a corner provides space for public input. Now, when the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, more than 200,000 people were killed instantly. In the years that followed, over 100,000 additional people died of radiation poisoning. The Japanese people today continue to experience the devastating and long-term effects of the bomb. It is now widely acknowledged by many top U.S. government officials at the time of the war that dropping the bomb on Japan was completely unnecessary. And I want to get into that section at this moment so that those who say, well, we need to create a memorial to the bomb because it ended the war, well, that's not true. I'm going to give you some quotes, Mr. Speaker. This is from Dwight David Eisenhower, who was General of the Armies and also later on President of the United States. He said, in July 1945, Secretary of War Stimson, visiting my headquarters in Germany, informed me that our government was preparing to drop an atomic bomb on Japan. I was one of those who felt there was a number of cogent reasons to question the wisdom of such act. The Secretary, upon giving me the news of the successful bomb test in New Mexico and of the plan for using it, asked for my reaction, apparently expecting a vigorous assent. During his recitation of the relevant facts, I had been conscious of a feeling of depression, and so I voiced to him my grave misgivings, first on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary, and secondly, because I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by use of a weapon whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives. It is my belief that Japan was, at that very moment, seeking some ways to surrender with a minimum loss of face. The Secretary was deeply perturbed by my attitude, unquote. That's Dwight Eisenhower in a book called Mandate for Change, page 360. From General Douglas MacArthur. Norman Cousins was a consultant to General MacArthur during the American occupation of Japan. Cousins writes of his conversations with MacArthur. Quote, MacArthur's views about the decision to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were starkly different from what the general public supposed. Cousin continues, when I asked General MacArthur about the decision to drop the bomb, I was surprised to learn he had not even been consulted. What I asked what his advice had been. He replied that he saw no military justification for the dropping of the bomb. The war might have ended weeks earlier, he said, if the United States had agreed, as it later did anyway, to the retention of the institution of the emperor. That's from a book called The Pathology of Power, Norman Cousins. Leo Szilard was the first scientist to conceive of how an atomic bomb might be made. That was in 1933. He speaks of a meeting with J. Robert Oppenheimer, the head scientist of the Manhattan Project. Here's the quote. Szilard, I told Oppenheimer that I thought it would be a very serious mistake to use the bomb against the cities of Japan. Oppenheimer didn't share my views. Well, said Oppenheimer, don't you think that if we tell the Russians what we intend to do and then use the bomb in Japan, the Russians will understand it? They'll understand it only too well, Szilard replied. Brigadier General Carter Clark, who was the military intelligence officer in charge of preparing intercepted Japanese cables, quote, when we didn't need to do it, and we knew we didn't need to do it, and they knew that we didn't need to do it, we used them as an experiment for 2 atomic bombs, unquote. This is quoted in Gar Alperovitz, The Decision to Use the Atomic Bomb. Alperovitz, by the way, who did 30 years of research on the subject, said, I think it can be proven that the bomb was not only unnecessary, but known in advance not to be necessary. Another quote. The Japanese position was hopeless even before the first atomic bomb fell because the Japanese had lost control of their own air. This is Henry H. Arnold, commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces. Quote, the Japanese had, in fact, already sued for peace. The atomic bomb played no decisive part from a purely military point of view in the defeat of Japan, unquote. Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Quote, the use of atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance in our war against Japan. The Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender. This is Admiral William D. Leahy, Chief of Staff to President Truman. Quote, certainly prior to 31st December 1945, and in all probability prior to 1st November 1945, Japan would have surrendered even if atomic bombs had not been dropped. Quote, and that's from the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, quote, the war would have been over in 2 weeks without the Russians entering and without the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb had nothing to do with the end of the war at all. This is from Major General Curtis LeMay. Now, it's just not disputable that this technology was not necessary. So let's go back to the creation of a national park and the naming of the park after the Manhattan Project. May I ask how much time I have?
The gentleman has 10 minutes remaining.
Thank you. We have to now ask ourselves, since it can be widely disputed and by top military officials that the dropping of the bomb was not necessary, then why are we naming this technology, honoring this technology with a national park? I mean, it's really a legitimate question. When the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, again, 200,000 people were killed.